Hi, James Proctor here. I'm your host on this first part of the three-part webinar. And what I did is we wrapped up the third part a couple days ago. And so what I'm doing is recording part 1, 2, and 3 after the various parts. Went back, kind of reorganized the artifacts, cleaned it up, made a nice tight presentation here. So this is part 1, and the concept here, part 1, and let me get my laser pointer out here. Let's see here, laser pointer, there it is. Okay, so in part 1, well, actually the overarching webinar, right, as all of you remember, the concept of late January, or really late December, early January, the scheduling meltdown, where there's a lot of cancellations and people stranded and things like that. So we wanted to I've done a lot of research into it. I've dug into it a little bit, not a little bit, a lot. I read a lot of articles, talked to a lot of people to try and get a sense of what happened. Now, this isn't like a gotcha kind of thing, right? I'm a big advocate, a big fan of Southwest Air. And, they're renowned for their quick turnarounds and things like that. So, what happened, right? Let's talk about the business systems and business processes. So in part 1 here, what we're going to talk about is the concept of looking at data-oriented business rules, understanding what are the things we need to know about it, and what do we need to know about those things, and what are the relationships and the rules governing data. I'm going to talk in just a minute or two here about the importance of data-oriented business rules. Then in part 2, I'm going to talk about the transactional kind of things. What are the kinds of things we need to do to support the concept of crew scheduling? And then in section 3, we put it all together. And it's section 3, or part 3, I guess I should say, is a lot of fun, because what we're going to do is actually dig in and see what happens when all of this comes under stress, and perhaps some of the things that can be done when those systems and processes come under stress. And I'm also going to give you a hypothesis, at least my view of what I think happened and what caused the meltdown. All right, so let's move on and have some fun with it, and let's just jump right in. And let's see here, go here, and I've got to find my little page down button there. So why are we here? Well, the basic concept in these 3 parts is, looking at this through the eyes of a business analyst. And as a business analyst, right, we want to do better requirements, right? Better requirements, complete, unambiguous, delivered faster kind of requirements. Now, requirements in and of themselves are really an interesting and challenging thing to do, but requirements are really a waypoint into better business systems, right? Better requirements lead to better business systems, because the better job we do of identifying, analyzing, and specifying requirements, the better job we're going to do of enabling the technical people to develop effective functionality, have great customer experiences, and these kinds of things, right? Now, but that's still a waypoint as well, because what we're really trying to do is enable better business process, right? Improve business process, improve effectiveness, efficiency, these kinds of things. Because business process is what creates value. And business process, right, creates value for our customers and internal and external, and delights our stakeholders and these kinds of things. So really it's all dependent on one another. Great requirements lead to better business systems, better business systems would lead to better process, and better business process, right, enables create tremendous value for our customers and our organization as well. All right, so how are we going to do it? Well, this 3-part webinar, so we did it as a live webinar, and this is really a post-webinar recap of the things we did in the live webinar. But how we're going to do it, or how we did it, is in section 1, which is what we're doing right now. Let's look at data and data-oriented business rules. Now, there's nothing technical about this. It's just understanding data and how that data lives in the real world. And it's absolutely important for complex systems like this. In part 2, we're going to look at identifying and analyzing key transactional requirements and business data analytics requirements. And those two travel together, because when we start talking about what do we need this system to do, what kind of functionality, but we also at the same time want to look at that and say, well, also by doing that, what kind of analytics that we need to be thinking about to help us make decisions and things like that. And that'll make more sense in part 2. Then in part 3, we're going to put all of these things together, run some scenarios, stress test the business processes and the business systems in connection with crew scheduling, as really the environment started closing in on us with that heavy weather. All right, so let's see here. Okay, so in part 1, It's really about business requirements and business system requirements. And we'll talk about that. And actually, we'll talk about it here in the introduction, the part one here. The business requirements, business systems requirements, there's a gray line there. Business requirements are all the things we need to do in an organization. It's all the work activities in our business process. Our business systems requirements are the things that we need to do to enable some of the things of our business requirements. Or think about it a different way. It's a subset of business requirements. It is those business requirements that we're going to further support from information technology, in this particular case, business application kinds of things. Now, data-oriented business rules versus transactional rules. All right, here in the bottom right, we're going to see this blown up in just a little bit. But there are really two halves to thinking about requirements. What are the things we need to do? And what are the things we need to know about in order to do the things we need to do? Right? So transactional rules and data-oriented business rules. The business vocabulary, which we'll be talking about in just a second here, but it's really understanding what are the key terms and concepts that we need to know about. All right? Because here in section 1, we're really dealing with the business vocabulary, terms and concepts, and data-oriented business rules. And I find in most organizations, many organizations for sure, really kind of struggle with the concept of understanding some of the core terms and concepts. And so different things mean different things in an organization. We don't get complete understanding of those kinds of things. So when you can think about that in your own organization, I'm sure there's plenty of terms and concepts in your particular organization that haven't been well defined. They're a little fuzzy and these kinds of things. And understanding our terms and concepts, the business vocabulary in a fuzzy way, is very difficult to be able to then build business systems on top of it. So why data-oriented business rules? Why is that important? Well, think about it this way. All right? Whatever you do, whatever organization you're part of, your transactional rules change very quickly over time, right? We're always evolving it as an organization. We're incrementally changing, we're transformationally changing, but we're continually changing over time. And those transactional rules to support those changing business processes are continually changing. But at the data side and data-oriented business rules, they tend to be very stable over time, regardless of the transactional side. So think of your data-oriented business rules as a firm foundation to build the transactional side on top of. And we're going to bring that into a little bit more focus here in just a little bit. And then also in this section, really throughout this section, I'm going to be talking about engaging subject matter experts. And the concept I like to talk about is making the shift from analog to digital. Now, what I mean by that is, and really going from what I call superficial requirements, right, to detailed kind of discussions, and having a conversation, an engaged conversation with our subject matter experts. So the concept here is really what I want. When I say go from analog to digital, moving away a little bit from text and bullet points to move into visual diagrams, process maps, activity diagrams, sequence diagrams, these kinds of things. But because that's what deeply engages our subject matter experts. Okay, so that's that, but let's talk about that, and we'll be talking about it in the context of, right, thinking about crew scheduling. All right. So think about it this way, right? This is the blow-up I was talking about. On the top half of the framework here, this is what we call our MODA framework, model-driven analysis. And it's not a methodology of any kind. It's just a way of having a conversation of how requirements come together, right? When you think about it, there are two halves, right? The things we do and the things we need to know about to do the things we do. So on the top half, we're talking about business activities. What are some of the things we might do in crew scheduling? Well, there's hundreds of things we do, but some of them might like schedule a flight or create a crew or assign an aircraft to a particular flight leg or dispatch a flight leg to make it operational, right? And 100 other things as well. So those are the things we do, right? Expressed as verb nouns. Schedule flight, that's the verb, there's the noun, create crew. If you were just to talk to your subject matter experts and just have that kind of conversation, what are the kinds of things we do and what do we need to know about those things, and express it in verb nouns, you'd very quickly, right, come up with a list of these kinds of things. Now the bottom half of the framework is just the nouns. And you've already done the heavy lifting, because if you're identifying the verb nouns, the things we do, we can then split away and create a separate listing of flight, crew, aircraft, flight leg, and things like that. Now, again, I get back to the concept of fuzzy kind of definition of things. When I started doing this, the concept of a flight, I looked up the concept of a flight in lots of different public domain information, and flights were fuzzily described and different concepts there. So what I really had to do is I went on and just created a reservation on Southwest Air, and then I deconstructed that reservation so I could understand, what's the concept of a flight? What's the concept of a flight leg? Generally, aircraft is fairly intuitive, right? It's a particular physical aircraft. It has a tail number and these kinds of things, right? Crew actually is a pretty fuzzy thing too. I had to really dig in and understand what is a crew, because there's different types of crews. At least at the aircraft level, there's the flight deck crew and there's the cabin crew. There are also the ramp crew, right? There's the gate crew. So what are you talking about when you're talking about crew, and what are the rules governing the concepts of crew and crew assignments and these kinds of things, right? So very, very quickly, even in this simple little example here, right? We're talking about the things we do, but we need to understand what these things mean, right, in order to do the things we do. All right? So we talked the organization's business vocabulary. All I'm saying is it's a source of confusion, right, among subject matter experts, among themselves, among subject matter experts and technical people. So what I'm saying is spend a little time up front, and that's really what section 1, or part 1, I should say, is all about of this webinar, is spending a little time up front trying to get these terms and concepts, your business vocabulary right, will really help you speed up both the quality, right, the speed and the quality of doing the transactional side. All right, so I did some research. I said, well, what is this? What's flight? First of all, what's a flight? Well, interesting enough, and I broke it down, and I just did a very simple little thing. Went on the website. I said, well, I want to go from Denver to Miami. All right. I said, all right, give me some ways to do that. Well, one of the things I just picked one just to kind of, that was a little bit more complicated and had some stops and things like that, just to be able to distill out some of these terms and concepts. So to get from Denver to Miami, all right, I started off on flight 2240, and I continued on 2240, and then I had to change to flight 43. Then I started breaking that down. I said, well, flight 2240 is from Denver to Tulsa, all right? And really what that is a flight leg. So flight 2240 has 2 flight legs, Denver to Tulsa, and then the second leg was from Tulsa to Houston, all right? So flight leg from Denver to Houston. Then in Denver, I would change planes and get on flight 43 from Houston to Miami. So at its most granular level, right, a flight leg is kind of the thing, right? A flight leg is a particular aircraft designated as a particular flight going from one leg to another leg to another leg. At least one could have many legs. So flight 2240 has 2 legs, Denver to Tulsa and Tulsa to Houston, right? And then I changed to flight 43, and that goes from Houston to Miami, just that one leg. Now, all of this together is notionally referred to as a passenger itinerary. It's really my origin and destination and all the waypoints in between, right? All the various flight legs. I felt, well, that finally I was able to get some traction on these things. So really, it's not so much the flight, it's the flight leg that's the thing. Now think about that, right? We're talking about crew scheduling here. And what we need is a crew. We need an aircraft for sure, right? And we need a crew on that aircraft to go from Denver to Tulsa. Now at Tulsa, right, we need a crew to go from Tulsa to Houston. And of course, we need an aircraft. Now, typically, and what I dug into this is I found that it's not always the case that it's the same aircraft and the same crew, right? So it could change. Often, it's going to be the same crew and the same aircraft that goes from Denver to Tulsa to Houston. But we could have a flight crew change. We could have a flight deck change in Tulsa. Independent of that, we could have a flight cabin crew change in Denver, and so on and so forth. Typically, we don't have an aircraft change, but it's possible. But now when we move over here to flight 43, right, we have a particular crew, right, that's going to be, it could be the same crew, it could be a different crew. Probably when we change flight, often it's a separate, we're changing planes, so generally it's a different plane. Every once in a while, though, I found some scenarios where a flight might terminate, say, in Houston, and that same flight then, same plane, different flight goes on to Miami. So at its core, we're really looking at the concept of flight leg and all the things that pivot around the concept of a flight leg. Now, that's a very simple concept once you break it down a little bit. But until you get down to that level of detail, right, it's hard to start talking about, well, how do we do crew scheduling? All right. So, all right, there's just some arrows there that point out what I have there. All right, so let's take a little, kind of break that down a little different way. So we start off here with our basic notion, our business vocabulary here. I just wanted to understand what the heck was the concept of a flight and a flight leg, right? Figured it out, had to do a little research on that. One of the things I didn't have access to, if I had really knowledgeable subject matter experts, dispatchers and schedulers and things like that, right, you can figure it out pretty quickly. And I keep coming back to that theme. Even in very, very complex situations, and flight scheduling and crew scheduling and all that, it's a very complex area, as we'll see in a little bit. But if I have some knowledgeable subject matter experts, I can get to the core of concepts very quickly, right, through interaction, high quality kind of conversation. So then we dig in a little bit deeper and we say, well, there's other things as well, right? It's not just, to actually understand the concept of scheduling, I need to know about a flight and a flight leg and a trip, which we'll talk about a little bit, which is really from a crew perspective. Associate, we'll call those, I just use that word to describe pilots, flight attendants, and lots of other people. A flight leg associate, that's a particular person on a particular leg, and a passenger. We didn't spend a lot of time with passenger on this part because we're really focused on crew, but I did put passenger in there to give it some context. We have aircrafts and airports and gates and terminals and many, many other things as well. So once we understand the basic concept of a flight and a flight leg, we expanded that out and said, what are the things involved? So we created a glossary of terms and concepts. Now, the point I want to make here is if you just create a really decent glossary of terms and concepts, and you define what things mean a little bit, you're ahead of about 90% of all organizations I come encounter with. Because one of the first things that come in and ask for on a project, say, well, kind of give me a glossary of terms and concepts. And they go, well, we got some stuff defined here and stuff here and some stuff in a spreadsheet here. And there's no really cohesive enterprise glossary of terms and concepts, right? And best practice tip, I would encourage you to create that. You don't have to do a special initiative. It's just as you do multiple projects or maybe reverse engineer some things, create that glossary of terms and concepts across the enterprise so you have those kinds of standards. So we identified some additional terms and concepts, and there's going to be many, many, many more. That's what my little 3 dots there mean. And we just start defining these things, right? A nonstop flight from a departure airport to a destination airport with a particular aircraft, we could go on, and a trip has some in a trip, and you'll always often find what we call synonyms, right? It's typically called a trip. Somebody could call it somewhere else a crew pairing, a crew rotation, these kinds of things. But a trip is a sequence of nonstop flights, aka flight legs, that start and end at the same airport, typically. Now, you could have exceptions to that. A trip could be a test flight, and a trip could actually begin and end at the same airport. But again, we don't have to get in that level of minutiae here. A trip is an itinerary for a crew member that typically spans 1 to 5 days. So now that's interesting. So when you're talking about crews, we're not talking about passengers now. We're talking about crew and crew members. A trip is at a base, starts at a base airport, and it ends at a base airport for a particular crew member. And I go, I might have 3 or 4 flight legs today and maybe 5 more tomorrow and 3 more the next day. And I take a rest between those days and I have to have airport transportation and a hotel. But all of that, right, is a trip and all the things in and around the concept of a trip. All right. So now, if you just stop there, again, you're ahead of 90% of the organizations. But let's not stop there because we've got to go a little bit deeper to really understand the concept of a flight leg, and all the things we need to do crew scheduling kinds of things. All right. So let's go do that. Now to do that, I'm going to, let's see here. Got it teed up here. I just got to go do it. And let's put it right here. Put it over here. All right, so what I have here is just a PDF, and all of you will get a copy of this PDF. That way, it has all these things. They're bigger, right? I can only put so much on the screen, but they're bigger. All right, so we have our business vocabulary here. We talked about that, terms and concepts, definitions. We know there's a top half and a bottom half. Well, right now we're still dealing with the bottom half of the framework. We're dealing with the concept of data and data-oriented business rules. Now, in some of the research I did, and this is actually kind of cool. Let me zoom up here a little bit and just isolate this. Okay, it's called the CSP, the crew scheduling problem. All airlines struggle with the crew scheduling problem. And in this particular white paper, is a kind of a technical white paper published by somebody in the airline industry. It's pretty cool. It says, given the published flight schedule of an airline, the key task is to assign all necessary crew members of flight deck and the cabin crew in such a way that the airline can operate all its published flights at minimum personnel. In other words, we've got to make our regulatory requirements, but we don't necessarily, we just need this certain amount of crew to be able to achieve certain levels of service and regulatory compliance, right? Now, what's interesting, we're going to talk in part 3 about how Southwest Air views crew scheduling and these kinds of things, or the crew scheduling problem. Now, because they're kind of a unique way of thinking about it, and it's very cool. Now, continuing with our definition here, the assignment must consider all restrictions by government regulations, union agreements, company-specific rules. In addition, time and location-dependent crew availabilities must be accounted for, especially in a setting where crew is stationed at one or more multiple airports called home bases. All right, that in a 2-paragraph, I don't know if something fell there, that in a 2-paragraph nutshell kind of gives you the sense of the space of crew scheduling. And we can start to I see what happened here. I dropped my mouse. Don't know where it went. There it is. Okay. Put this back here. Don't know why that knocked off. Okay. So in just these 2 paragraphs, we can start actually distilling more things. What's a flight deck crew versus a cabin crew, and we've got crew members, and we've got flights, and we got regulatory issues and all kinds of things we could dig into. So we did some business vocabulary, we defined some additional terms and concepts, and so on and so forth. But now let's take it to a deeper level. What I want to know is not only what are my terms and concepts, what do I want to know about those terms and concepts, and how do they relate one to another? What are the rules governing how these things interact with each other? Now, to do that, I'm going to introduce something called a conceptual data model. Right? So it's a little deeper cut, and those of you that have worked with these kinds of things, you know about it. If not, just be aware of it. All right? And I'm going to talk you how to at least critically think about it. And that's what this is really all about, is critical thinking in the business space of business analysis. And so it's all going to pivot around this thing called a flight leg, right? I made that comment earlier on. When you really get down to the most granular concept, it's all about a flight leg. A flight leg, right, has an origin airport and a destination airport, and it's part of a particular flight. So that particular flight has one or more flight legs. Each flight leg has a particular origin and destination airport. Each flight leg has a particular aircraft assigned to that flight leg. Each flight leg has a crew or a set of crew members assigned to that particular flight leg. So let's just deconstruct it a little bit. So what it comes down to is the flight is really not as big a deal as it sounds like. It could have some flight and a flight number and things about the flight, but really a flight could have many flight legs, right? Flight leg 1 was from Denver to Tulsa, then a flight leg 2 was from Tulsa to Houston, and then we switched planes and went from Houston to Miami. All right. Now I'm a scheduler, and I'm trying to create a schedule. We create a schedule a year in advance, right? So what I can do as a scheduler, I'm creating really the flights. We'll call them flights because that's what they call them, but really it's flight legs. But flights schedule a year in advance because I can go online today and start booking flights a year in advance. And what you're really booking is flight legs, but they call them flights, all right? So now let's think about this a little bit. In order to do that, there are tens of thousands of airports across North America and the world, right? And so in my route schedule, let's talk about Southwest Airlines, in their route schedule or network, right? I don't fly, or at least I don't create a flight leg really, between any origin, any airport and any other airport. There's allowable pairs, in my flight network, right? So if I'm a scheduler, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to look at 1,000 origins and 1,000 destinations and, no. We've predefined a set of allowable pairs, right? For example, Denver to Tulsa is allowable pair. Tulsa to Houston is allowable pair. Houston to Miami is allowable pair, right? So we've dialed it down to, this is a set of rules now that says we have an allowable airport pair that consists of one origin and one destination airport. So as a flight scheduler, I'm going to pick from my set of allowable pairs. Now, what else goes into a flight leg? Well, a flight leg is part of a flight. A flight leg eventually is going to have an origin and destination gate. Now, when we create it a year in advance, we don't know what the gate at the airport, the origin airport or the destination gate, but we know as the flight's closer and closer and closer, maybe 24 hours in advance, it gets a origin gate assignment. Of course, that can change. And then the flight's going to have a destination gate assignment. And sometimes it maybe have an initial one, but maybe that changes and things like that. But it's eventually going to have an origin and destination gate. That aircraft, that flight leg is going to have a particular aircraft assigned to it. Now, not initially, right? When I create those flight legs for that particular flight, I don't know what aircraft is going to be a year out. But as we get closer and closer and closer, maybe 48 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, 6 hours in advance, right, we're going to schedule a particular flight aircraft. Now, that aircraft is a particular type, right? It could be a 737 MAX, 11 stretch. No, I guess they don't have a stretch, but it can be configured different ways, right? So we have aircraft types, and that aircraft is of a particular type and a particular configuration. All right, what else do we have to talk about here? Well, a lot of different things. Let's go to, just from a passenger's perspective real quick. I'm just using the word passenger just in a generic way. It's the person that's going to have a reservation and flies on the flight. And I'm going to I can create many reservations over time. And that reservation is going to actually include a number of flight legs. Now, that reservation could be a flight, and that flight could have a number of flight legs. We could think about it that way. But really, my reservation is from a number of flight legs. I'm going from Denver to Tulsa. Denver to Tulsa, Tulsa to Houston, Houston to Miami. All right. So from a passenger standpoint, that's going to be my itinerary. But now let's think a little bit more about crew scheduling. So one of the things as a crew, one of the things that a crew member gets to do, right now we're just talking about the cabin crew, right, the pilot and co-pilot. We're talking about the flight attendant crew. They get to bid on something called a trip, right? So they are told next month, here's what you're flying. They actually get first cut at bidding on it by seniority. And there's a lot of different bidding rules and preferences and strategies and all those kinds of things. Maybe I want to just take, get the most amount of legs in a day, but get home by the end of the day, right? Or maybe I'm willing to go a longer trip and, 3 or 4 day trip and get some longer, fly. I don't know, whatever. But there's lots of things. But those bids are based on a lot of different things, who you are and what your credentials are, right? Because not every, you at the flight crew level, you're either a pilot or a first officer, right? You can't be both, except for certain exceptions, but you're a pilot or first officer, and then you're credentialed, for lack of a better word, there's probably a better word in the airline industry, qualified to fly certain types of aircraft, right? And so I can fly this type of aircraft, this type of aircraft, and this type of aircraft, right? And so that's the concept there. So now I'm going to bid on a trip, or I could be a flight attendant, right? And same thing, I'm going to be qualified for certain types of aircraft. I'm going to bid on a trip. So I can't bid on every possible trip out there, right? Because there's lots of trips out there I can bid on there's lots of trips, right? But I can only bid on trips that are consistent with the rules governing how me with my credentials and other things can bid on a particular trip, right? What I'm qualifying for, and I have preferences. I only want to fly weekends. I don't want to fly weekends. I don't want to do overnights. I can do overnights. I can do anyhow. So basically, we're gonna in part 2, we're going to talk about actually the transactional functional requirements of bidding on a trip. But from a data perspective, right, I'm going to be presented with trips. So I log in, hit the little green button that says bid on trip or trips. The system's going to present me with trips that I'm eligible to bid on. Right, so there's the concept of that. So that's a big part of crew scheduling. And then if certain trips haven't been bid on or we need to fill out, flight scheduler will, start filling those kinds of things out and assign people to those things. There's some rules here governing aircraft type eligibility. There's some rules here regarding certain restrictions and domestic only, weekends only, these kinds of things. What do we have here? The concept of dispatch and dispatched, fuel, baggage loaded, crew assigned, all these kinds of things. Jetway, pull back, doors closed. This gets very operationally tactical, right? Because now we have a flight leg from Denver to Houston. It's flight whatever it was, 2240. The first leg is from Denver to Tulsa. Somewhere along the line, very close to that flight, things start having to happen. A particular aircraft has to be assigned, right? It has to be a healthy aircraft, meaning it's ready to go. It gets assigned to that particular flight. It has to get fueled. Things have to happen. A particular crew, right, is already pre-assigned to that flight leg, so we know who the crew is. But as things break down, as we'll see in part 3, right, the whole crew scheduling and changing flights and changing planes and changing flight legs gets very, very, very volatile, right, as things break down. So that'll be interesting to work on as well. The flight status, leg status itself could be boarding, en route, landed, arrived. It could be state of canceled, things like that. The point I want to make here, and let me zoom out. Again, you're going to get this whole PDF, is we just start off by trying to understand the basic vocabulary. We then extend that vocabulary and try and identify the terms and concepts in and around that particular space. Right? We're not going to get all of them, but a lot of them. And as we do more analysis, more will emerge. I would define them, just have a conversation between you and your team and subject matter experts, just so you have a meeting of the minds about what these things mean. But that conversation is so critical because as you talk about what things mean, you discover there's other things that you have to discover what they mean. And so that whole network or concept of your list of terms and concepts will evolve. Okay, let's go back to the presentation here. All right, so that's what we talked about here. And what else? All right, it's a busy slide, but these are the things we talked about on the PDF that you'll get. So this thing called a conceptual data model, right, takes us to the next level. It's really asking for all of these terms and concepts, right? What do I want to know about them? Those are the attributes, things like trip name, trip status. How do they relate one to another? So that vocabulary, to kind of bring that back into the fold, the vocabulary is so important, just terms and concepts. Because until I get the vocabulary right, it's very hard to do transactional kinds of things. So spend a little bit of time up front in a project, engaging those subject matter experts, right, and identifying the business vocabulary in and around it. Now, it might be in a particular space you already have a glossary of terms and concepts. That's great. Start there. Just validate that it's still accurate and current, and everybody has a meeting of minds about it. All right. The other big concept, I talked about this in the intro to this section, is transactionally, right? The business changed as quickly and often, right? But the data and data-oriented business rules are stable over time. Great example of that, I did a project a number of years ago with Long Island Railroad, right? It's a commuter railroad out on Long Island, outside of New York. And Long Island Railroad's been around since the late 1800s, right? If you were to go back and look at how we ran a railroad 150 years ago and how we run a railroad today, it's very different. The whole concept of just, online ticketing and how baggage handling works and routes and crews, it's changed quite a bit in 150 years. But at its core, the underlying data vocabulary and data-oriented business rules hasn't changed much in 150 years, right? Today we still have trains and we have crews and we have depots and we have packages and these kinds of things. So really the underlying terms and concepts, or the data model, if you will, hasn't changed much in 150 years. But the transactional requirement side, the top half, is completely different, changed tremendously over 150 years. All right. Now that's kind of an extreme example, but it really illustrates the point I'm trying to make here. Understand your terms and concepts up front at a minimum, right? I'd encourage you to take it as far as a conceptual and then logical data model, right? Then you have a firm foundation to start looking at transactional requirements. Okay, if you want to know a little bit more about these concepts, we have our training programs, particularly in the world of data. We have logical data modeling, we have advanced data modeling, excellent courses to really develop your skills in the world of data. In our business systems analysis class, that's where we go deep in the world of how to identify, analyze, and specify requirements. And we get a little bit into data there as well, but we're primarily focused on the transactional requirements over there. And of course, our soft skills course is really about engaging our subject matter experts. Okay, so what I encourage you to do here, if you like what you're seeing, feel free to refer friends and colleagues. Have them take a look at this as well. All they have to do is go to our website, inteqgroup.com/I love Southwest Airlines. Okay, I love SWA, and you can just all you do is just register. They can register, and they'll get direct access to the videos, part 1, 2, and 3, and all the other materials, the PDFs and such. Okay, so when you're ready, let's move on to part 2. We just wrapped up the part 1 video, right? Identifying and analyzing data-oriented business rules. In part 2, we're going to go to the top half of the framework, identifying and analyzing transactional requirements and data analytic requirements, because those two run together, transactional and data analytics requirements. Okay, see you in the next, in part 2, and I'm out. Bye-bye.